Great, great. Well, so after talking about these present days and the multiple roles, which from my understanding, you're still on all of those.
Yeah.
um, yeah, good, good. Let's talk about the early days. You were born 1965. Your
hmm
father was already two-time world champion, and he won his last one in the year after 66. So I presume that motor racing was all over your childhood and being a teenager. But I know that your father was able to keep you away from that, and you were farming and working on a farm. But in those early days, you were so actually considering a professional called normal, like a farmer, a doctor, an accountant, and nothing related to racing? Or was it all motor racing since day one on a Brabham family?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't what my father and my mother wanted. I guess. My dad went through the sort of 50s and 60s, and there was a lot of obviously deaths, and they lost a lot of friends. And then when Dad retired 4 years later, my older brother Jeff wanted to race, and he started racing, and he found that difficult because he was the first of the sons of that went through, and he kind of paved the way for a lot of other people. Including myself. But as I was younger, like I said, I Dad retired when I was 5, so I don't remember his racing as a Grand Prix driver. I remember growing up in Australia, and he was probably the most famous person in Australia at that time. So, you could imagine walking around with my father all the time in Sydney or wherever it was in Australia, and people would recognize him and make a fuss of him. And as a kid, not really fully understanding what he did or what he achieved, was somewhat confusing because people would treat him differently to how they would treat other people. And as a child growing up, you're trying to make sense of all of that. Um, and my as I said, my passion was football. I played football all the time. I loved it, and I wanted to, as a kid, wanted to have a career of football, like so millions others. But just that wasn't to be. And then I obviously went to this agricultural boarding school at age 13, and I ended up learning all about agriculture and Australian rules football. So I never played soccer anymore. It was all about Aussie rules and having fun at sport, which I loved. And then when I was on the farm, although I never ever thought about racing at that point, I did love driving fast and the thrill of pushing myself, whether it was climbing a tree, climbing the house, driving fast on tractors, utes in Australia or motorbikes. It didn't matter what it was. It was always flat out and sideways. Um, and that was a huge part of my life, as well as working on the farm. So it really wasn't till I left school at 16 to go to a college in the local town, that I actually spent 3 months then going to America to watch my older brother Jeff race in Indy cars, which was his first year in that series. Saw a go kart in the workshop. Didn't even know people race go karts, and I was 16, 17 years of age. So it shows you how removed I was from motorsport in general.
And is it true, or is it only a good piece of an anecdote regarding to this first sight of a go kart that you asked? Does people actually race this? Is that true?
Yeah, and that's what I said. I said, do people actually race go karts? And now my brother was sitting in a Can Am car that he was doing a few one-off races because he'd won the Can Am championship the year before, and Rick Gallis, who was running Al Unser Jr., wanted some help to win the championship, so they got a car for Jeff to run in 3 or 4 rounds, and I went over there. He was doing a seat fitting, and there I am in the workshop talking to the mechanic on a go kart, asking him the most silly question. Oh, do people race go karts? And he just turned around to me. He said, "Are you adopted?" So it's just like he was joking, but it was like, seriously, hang on a minute. You're part of the biggest and most famous, one of the famous racing names in motorsport history, and you're asking whether they people race go-karts. It's like, where are you from, mate? That's how it was. And after that trip, I went back to Australia, having spent 3 months, carrying my brother's helmet, sitting in debrief meetings, listening, learning. It opened up a whole new world to me, because I was used to, trying to chase sheep. So the motorsport world seemed a lot more exciting. And then, of course, I went back to Australia and sat down with my dad, and I said, I'd like to have a go on a go kart. And his mouth just dropped. He couldn't believe it. So I said, well, I'm not going to get any help there. So I went over to my neighbor who I went to school with, and I said, let's go to a go kart race. We went off to the local go kart track. It was about 3.5 hours away from where we lived. Just was amazed at what we saw. We bought a secondhand go kart, and off we went. And that's how it started.
Wow. So that's the are you adopted question is still
Yeah,
it's true.
yeah.
Yeah.